All right, guys, we're back. So let's just get into it here. Right here, this is where we should have been from last time. We're inside lesson 7 on BandLab. You all should see that lesson in there. If you have to go reopen BandLab, feel free. Just click on open that, start assignment, get into the mix editor for lesson 7, Programming Arithmetic Notation Part 1, and this is where we are. Now, we clicked our drum machine. We clicked instrument in the bottom left corner, which brings up our sequencer page right here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and take those rhythms from earlier and plug them in. So let's take a look at what those rhythms looked like. So hopefully all this looks familiar. Hopefully we all have a good understanding here between our rhythm syllables and the number counts for each of these. So we're going to take each one of these 4 different patterns and we're going to program that into our sequencer on BandLab now. So we're going to start by programming in this first pattern that we put together, because I do find that most people seem to really like going ahead and just filling in all of the different spots along our sequencer just to start off. So as we see here, we've got 16th notes across 4 different beats, which means obviously 4 different notes in each beat. So if we take a look over here into our drum sequencer, we're going to do this on the red line here. So anything that's got the red dots, we want to use it on what we call the closed hi-hat. So 4 notes per beat. Remember, each beat is a slightly different shade of gray here. So we already have the first dot filled in. So we're going to go ahead and fill in the other 3 blocks available to us on the first beat, which is, of course, this light gray section. This will be 1, E, and just like we see right over here at the very beginning of our pattern. Now, of course, now we're over to beat 2. Same thing. We're going to go right here, fill in the 4 different spots on the dark gray, which will take up all of beat number 2. We'll do the same thing for beat 3, and of course for beat 4. So if you guys were to go ahead and count each one of these, which would be kind of annoying, would be 16 different notes across, which is why we call these 16 notes, because you have 4 different beats, like the light gray, dark gray, light gray, dark gray beats 1, 2, 3, 4, as we've talked about in the past, and 4 notes per beat. So 4 times 4, 16. This is why we call it 16th note. 16th notes is right here. So this should sound something like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So if I click play, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And so just like that, we've now got pattern 1 all put in to our drum sequencer on BandLab. So let's take a look at pattern number 2 now. So now we're over to pattern number 2 right here. Now I was kind of secretly, quietly hoping that all along somebody would recognize what I was doing here. Now, the last time we talked about using the drum machine over here, we did talk about what this is. Does anybody remember what this might be called? Notice where the sound is. Only on beats 2 and 4. We deliberately, very clearly have left beats 1 and 3 as a rest, which means it's silent. Now this should ring a bell. This is something that we call a backbeat, which of course when we checked out making a beat on a drum machine, it was one of the first things I talked about was getting a good backbeat is a good anchor to start a good beat from. We're actually going to use beat 2 over here on the purple, right here, which is what we call a snare drum. Which if you've ever seen a drum set, is the drum that sits right between a drummer's knees that is really kind of the anchor of the sound. One of the most important things we can have in a mix. So what we got to do here is, as you can see here, we only have sound on beat 2 and beat 4. Now, when we take a look at beat 2 and 4, of course, these are the dark gray regions right over here. What we got to be careful with is the quarter note takes up the entire beat of beat 2 and beat 4. So that means that we're going to put our dot right at the beginning of that beat. We can't put it anywhere else because the rest of it, that would mean that if I put it here, you'd only get 3/4 of the beat. If I put it here, it'd be only half the beat, or right here, only 1/4 of the beat. So we want to take up the whole beat. So we put it right at the beginning. So it takes up all 4/4 of the beat. We just talked about from the 16th notes, of course. Well, of course, we have another one over here on 4. So we've got it on 2 and 4. Now, of course, the way that we have it put into our drum machine now, with the red section and this purple section, is now pattern 1 and pattern 2 together. So if I were to play both of these together, we should hear 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and from pattern 1, and just 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 from pattern 2. Let's take a listen and see how these sound together. One, 2, 3, 4. So we're already off to a really solid start. This is something I've kind of talked about back when we did first look at this drum machine here. But now we're actually seeing what this looks like with the actual notation. So let's move on to pattern number 3 now. Okay, so now we can take a look at pattern number 3 right here. Now, we're going to do this a little bit of a different process so that this one doesn't get too confusing. Let's just use the simplest path we can find to input this into our drum machine. Now, let's say right here, looking at all of these notes, maybe looking at the count with all the parentheses, that can get a little bit confusing. But if we look at our rhythm syllables up here, this is actually the simplest way to look at it. Everything says T, 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 right? So that's all eighth notes. Now, if we were to come over to our pattern sequencer on the drum machine, that would mean that every other block is an eighth note, okay? Just think tika, tika, or one and, 1 and, 2 and. Every other block, every time we skip a block, that means we're moving half a beat at a time, like eighth notes. So what I'm going to suggest is when we go put this in, we'll just put it in as all eighth notes, like a T, 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 T. And then we'll take out the ones that have rests on them once we get everything put in. For pattern 3, I'm going to suggest that we use the hand claps right down here on the light blue, just below the red line for our closed hi-hat. So, like I said before, we're just going to go ahead and put these in as eighth notes, like the T's, which means we're going to skip every other block and just go all the way across. Once you have all of the eighth notes put in, it's going to look something like this. But of course, this cannot be correct, as we don't have straight eighth notes going all the way across. Because if we notice, even if we look at the T's here, there are some that are in parentheses because of the rests that we have on beat 2, on beat 3, and on beat 4. Now, since we have multiple notes on each beat, for example, with eighth notes, there's 2 notes for each number beat. First beat, second beat, third beat, fourth beat. Notice that we've got to put the rest on the beat where the number starts, which of course means if we come to our pattern sequencer, that's the first note on the beat. So if we take a look here, beat 1 has no rest, so we can leave all of this light gray alone. But if we take a look at the dark gray for beat 2, there is a rest on beat 2, the very beginning of beat 2. So we'll get rid of the first one on beat 2. And this same thing happens on beats 3 and 4. So we can go to beat 3, the next light gray section, and get rid of the first one because there's a rest there. And then, of course, same thing on beat 4, the dark gray section. So now we should have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So now, of course, when we take a look at our pattern sequencer, in red, we will have pattern 1 right here on the hi-hat line. We'll have pattern 2 down here in purple, the backbeat on our snare drum. And now for pattern 3, we have it on the baby blue, light blue, sky blue, whatever color you want to call that, clap line right here. So let's take a listen to what all 3 of these will sound like together right here in our pattern sequencer. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Well, there you go. Now, of course, this leaves us only one more thing to do, which is pattern 4. Let's try that out. All right, so here we are, pattern 4. This one is fairly similar to pattern 3 in that it has a lot of eighth notes, but we have to first off take a look at beat 1 of the pattern, of this one measure pattern, which is a quarter note. Of course, we said before when we did our backbeat that each quarter note needs to take up the entire beat. So we're going to put this on the first block of the sequencer for that beat. Here for pattern 4, we're going to put this down on the very bottom of our sequencer on the bass drum or kick drum, as it may be known in slang terms. So, like we said right here, we've got a quarter note on beat 1, which means we have to put it at the very beginning of the beat, right here. So it takes up all of the light gray, not just some of it, but all of it. Okay, there you go. So that's our ta for beat 1. So now we can go to beat 2. Now we are beginning to run a little bit short on time here. So my challenge to you is going to be to finish putting in this pattern number 4 right down here on the orange line at the bottom of your sequencer, the kick drum sound right over here. Use the tips and tricks I showed you through here to help you through that, especially this way of adding all of the eighth notes and then pulling out the notes that have a rest on them. And that when you're done, go right up to the top corner, click save, and I'll be able to see your work. Also, don't forget your exit ticket over here on the Padlet. It's a simple question having to do with the colors that we used for each pattern here. Okay, my friends, thank you again for all this. We're done with talking about rhythm. We'll talk about something different next week. Have a wonderful week, guys. Stay healthy out there. Peace.